So welcome to today's webinar, Adding Value to Blockchain Value, an overview of hybrid blockchains and interoperability. Little brief plug-in. Envision Blockchain Solutions, we are a Microsoft partner in the space. We're deeply ingrained with the engineering team, in touch with various different individuals within the Microsoft blockchain ecosystem, as well as an AWS partner, as well as IBM. And of course, we're proud members of the EEA, of course, certified by the Certified Blockchain for Business by the Linux Foundation, which of course hosts a series of projects, all the Hyperledger projects, and Corda certified and Corda partners as well. So just to get started, we're just going to go through a brief overview as to who Envision Blockchain is, what we do. And as you can see, we have an array of different competencies as we had just briefly explained our memberships, but just moving forward into an array of other competencies that we have with respect to IoT, data analytics, BI reporting, so on and so forth, which will kind of tie in together here in just a moment on the next slide, and we kind of get into a little bit about what we do. We are a blockchain systems integrator. Most organizations don't really quite understand that concept. And if you've visited us in any of our previous webinars, we've routinely made this part of our intro, just to kind of highlight some of our blockchain services here on the left. So as a full stack consultancy, we take our clients through an experience from ideation all the way through go live production, and of course support, network and ecosystem development, which we'll of course speak about as one of our challenges today. And of course, in the center, we see that modern cloud and on-prem solutions become part of, custom development. So not only are we a full stack, not only are we a full consultancy, but we are also a custom modern application development organization, making us what we call blockchain systems integrator, a full consultancy blockchain systems integrator in today's time. And of course, we have an array of workshops that we conduct. You can find these listed in the Azure Marketplace, which we leverage in order to help bring our clients through various different experiences, as mentioned, ideation, use case analysis, so on and so forth. So what does a blockchain systems integrator really do? What does it really look like? And realistically, it starts off just like anything else. We have our ERP systems on the left, which everybody's quite accustomed and familiar with. In the lower center, we of course have our databases. Maybe we have additional additional layers and additional structure databases to help normalize data. In the upper left there, we have a user interface, or potentially whatever IoT devices, cell phones, other ways that we can begin, users can begin interacting with an application. And of course, on the right-hand side, we have this new component of the modern cloud, blockchain. And we're not going to go deep into what is the blockchain today and the blockchain 101. We're really going to be focused more on, the pros and cons of private, permissioned, public, and then take you into the future as to what's going on with hybrid blockchains and of course the future of interoperability. On the lower left, we of course have DevOps, which is an integral part of being a modern cloud applications developer, especially within the blockchain realm, for numerous reasons. And we have a whole webinar that we had recorded. You can visit our website regarding that. So taking us through this journey, we have inputs from, let's say, an ERP system, which hits some sort of API or web job, which of course pushes information to some sort of centralized database, normalizes data, pushes that to another web job. And we now have this blockchain adapter or connector, if you will, which of course pushes information to this ledger, whereby it returns information to the rest of the system, portraying information, let's say, to a user interface. Now, in reality, this is just one system. And where we're going to go from here is the added components now into the modern cloud. So how does all of this really work? What just showed up on the screen here is, a series of microservices that allow the systems to begin communicating with each other in an automated fashion and programmable fashion, which in this case are all hosted in Docker containers and orchestrated by Kubernetes clusters. And realistically, what we're looking at here is the modern cloud solutions that we portrayed on the previous screen, which are all part of today's modern cloud application. But how do we get from this system into recognizing today's value of what is so hyped or what is so spoken of, highly spoken of with respect to blockchain? And that takes us into this world of emerging technology and this pattern of blockchain adoption and this adoption curve of early adopters and to the early majority, the late majority, and the laggards. Some would say that the industry to start obviously in 2009 or even beforehand when they were just getting before predates just the basics of cryptography and trying to piecemeal things together, and the development of the initial protocols and different things like that. These are your innovators and your early adopters, really started coming into play, I'd say, in 2016. As far as the enterprise early adopters, we're really talking about, 2017 into 2018, and we're seeing a rapid increase currently of early adopters in 2019, which leads me to believe that, the early majority will really start to begin taking place here in 2020, through 2025. And Gartner previously put out a report that by 2030, that the world will be merging blockchain value, and there'll be added value in blockchain, or added value from blockchain in roughly the amount of 3.1 trillion in global economic value. So we're looking at the late majority into from 2025 and the laggards beyond 2030. So what is blockchain? It's a distributed and decentralized ledger. There you see that we call it a database, but realistically, it's arguable. We don't want to confuse you and call it a database, but theoretically into the future, it may be considered one, and we can get into the reasons as to why. More importantly, it's an immutable chain of historical records comprised of nodes hosted in virtual machines, or the Docker containers that we were just showing you on the previous screen, which hold a copy of this immutable ledger or record of transactions. And of course, there's some sort of governance in play to help govern how the network is going to work, who's going to theoretically participate, how transactions are going to be validated, and in a series of variations of which we highlight in previous webinars that go through some of our blockchain 101s. And of course, the ledger is programmed with smart contracts, which is basically an if-then code type structure, which can provide some sort of automation. And because it's immutable, we can begin trusting the automation, which allows blockchain to increase business process efficiency, or of course, in the financial world, it allows various intermediaries to be dismissed from a specific business process, in an array of different opportunities. So we just went through some of these values, but just at the high level, again, we just want to stress that immutability of data, transparency of the ledger, the security with respect to cryptography, and an array of other variations of security, which we've also identified in another one of our webinars, and of course, real-time workflows that are triggered by smart contracts. Provides this new level of trust between business parties, and we're going to begin discussing now some of the adoption challenges that we've currently seen since the inception of blockchain, and how we are going to wind up overcoming these into the future. So with respect to blockchain, with respect to enterprise or government requirements, right? Not necessarily just, you know, any individual creating an application and just would like to leverage, you know, blockchain for their own personal purposes, whatever the case might be, with, you know, various participants around the world, such as a Bitcoin type use case. We're talking about enterprise adoption challenges or government adoption challenges in this specific space. And of course, on the left, we have a series of requirements such as scalability, latency or throughput, transactions per second within the network, confidentiality of data, and of course, the way we you know, any entity or organization can begin governing and making sure they can manage that specific technology for their own specific purposes and benefits. Now, as a direct result of that, we have a series of adoption challenges that come into play. And we put blockchain interoperability in here because realistically, we wanted to fast track straight into what the future really holds. If I were to put in present what that should say, it should say cost and ROI. And I say that because the cost of implementation or development of the technology is one thing, and recognizing a return on investment is another thing. And the return on investment in blockchain can be identified in various different ways and can be measured in various different ways. But of course, the primary fact, the bottom line remains that the development of an ecosystem or a network is really the underlying value of having a decentralized, immutable ledger where multiple different entities may or may not participate or should not see specific information in various different ways. Now, of course, we remain in current times, but that being said, with, of course, regulatory and compliance issues as it pertains to different industry verticals, which then translates into legalities in the way that we establish specific networks, whether that's, you know, going to be a private network where that you don't have any sort of legality issues, or a public network where you run into compliance issues, or you're trying to develop a permission ledger, which we'll get to here in just a minute, where you're bringing a group of organizations together to form this network. And of course, global industry standards. How can we begin translating cross-industry verticals and begin communicating in a single language across various different businesses in various different parts of the world where we speak different languages with different governing bodies and countries. So the types of blockchain here that we're really going to just take a high-level overview on, that we want to really kind of focus in on right now, because this is the now. The now is permission side of the world, or permissionless side of the world. And we're going to get into those details right now, starting off with, let's say, private blockchains. Realistically, on the left here, the three symbols that we're looking at is basically Quorum, Hyperledger projects, and Corda. You could also include Ethereum in there. Ethereum does have an enterprise Ethereum permissioned or private blockchain, as well as you have the permissionless or the public networks, Ethereum, in this case Stellar, and EOS are public networks. And not all networks are the same, and we're about to establish some of the variations and differences between them. So getting into private blockchains, we start off with the same exact setup as a modern cloud application, but at the end of this, we really need to keep in mind that we're adding a component again to the modern cloud application. That's the blockchain component. We're going to come back and we're going to focus on that. So once again, the same routine winds up happening. And the same system winds up happening for this specific application, where everything comes back to the user interface, but now maybe you have users outside. You can see a reverse arrow now coming back into this web job that can theoretically participate with this specific network, and the business receives specific information back to the ERP. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the users outside of the network are participating in the validation process. At the same time, that doesn't necessarily provide any sort of decentralization of the network. So what's the difference between this and some sort of centralized model? Well, in Hyperledger Fabric, for example, an ordering service is what we consider, let's say, a validator node in some of the public blockchain use cases, or Ethereum, for example. That allows certain transactions to hit the ledger versus peers, where you can have participants of the network that host a peer, which means they're hosting a copy of that ledger. So you can create this sense of decentralized, this decentralization in private blockchain. But again, just to highlight, this is an invite-only type network. So you have a business that's interested in protecting the rights to maintaining the network and protecting the rights to who can validate transactions on the network. And at the same time, it provides them the ability to have higher throughput or lower latency type network features. It allows them to scale out or have as many users as they want. The user base doesn't necessarily translate to the amount of participants, and vice versa. Participants meaning entities that host, that don't necessarily host an ordering service, but host that copy of the ledger that we were just speaking about. And of course, is cloud consumption-based pricing. So that's something that's very easy for a CFO or for organizations to currently understand. And it's easier to achieve data privacy and compliance because that entity is specifically in control as to what specific information hits the ledger and what becomes visible and what isn't visible. So they're in complete control of this specific network and ecosystem. Now, of course, decentralization becomes a potential threat because how many peers or how many other entities are hosting this, and how does the public or other businesses perceive this, or how do the users perceive this? Nobody really knows. Nobody really has that specific insight, which is a bit of a, it's not exactly true trust within that specific system. So there's back and forth debate on decentralization and trust within that system. And of course, that leads everybody to say, hey, we're relying on this one network administrator. What are they doing behind closed doors, so on and so forth. And obviously that limits specific use cases, and it could potentially limit interoperability with other blockchains, depending on whether or not they want to make that private blockchain available. But at the same time, one of the pros that we don't have listed is that they can make that private blockchain available for interoperability, and we can get into that in just a little bit. So that brings us into permissioned or consortium blockchains, where we have the same private modern cloud application type setup, but now you have different entities with the same similar type of setup, maybe some variations to their specific application, but they begin sharing this ledger, and this decentralized model becomes more and more decentralized. And at one point in time, they considered this concept hybrid because it wasn't necessarily private and it wasn't necessarily public. But as we've moved forward through this adoption life cycle curve, this concept of hybrid, or the definition of hybrid, has shifted. This model specifically says, hey, there's going to be a specific entity, or there's going to be the entity that's going to be in charge is going to be, a specific group of individuals that are in charge of managing this specific network and governing it from consensus to upgrades and who has specific rights to enter, who has specific rights to view, who has specific rights to transact, so on and so forth. So again, it provides some level of privacy with respect to, let me take privacy back. It provides some level of control with respect to how to mitigate risk when it comes to, let's say, different compliance or regulatory issues that different organizations or industry verticals may require. So on the upper right there, you see the pros, we see the cons. Governance and network administration is democratic, right? It could theoretically be voted upon, or they could have a constitution whereby the governance model lives up to. Likewise, transaction visibility has its limitations. There's now greater decentralization than private blockchains. There's increased performance over public blockchains. Likewise, they're more scalable. And again, it's a consumption-based model whereby we're eliminating any sort of price volatility that we'll get into with the public blockchains. But then at the same time, it poses legal challenges that we spoke about at the beginning. This is a major hurdle. It slows business process down. It slows the speed of adoption. And realistically, it's to spawn a new consortium is a major effort. And although this decentralization and this model is bringing us more into, this decentralized state whereby you have more network participants, and it's an easier way for your business to begin recognizing return on investment. We're still not 100% there, and the costs and the risks to different business leaders in various different entities, whether that's government or enterprise organizations, are still costly decisions for them to be making. Which brings us into public blockchain. Public blockchain is exactly how it sounds. You can build applications on top of it. It's open to anyone to join. You are basically, anybody is capable of viewing the ledger. You're of course bound by, whatever governance model that specific ledger has established. But as a direct result of it being available to everybody, and all of these pros that we see in the upper left, that's the exact opposite of private. Now we have a decrease in performance, we have a decrease in scalability, and public networks are naturally incentivized or financially incentivized for network participation, whereby we're not necessarily just transacting, value or business data. We're transacting business data in exchange for something, where we're inviting other validators and participants of the network, and thereby we incentivize them to be there to basically allow for the growth of that network. Even though we have issues with scalability, we're enticing the adoption rate of public networks through financial incentives. And many of the public blockchains have begun taking a look at developing different interoperability. Likewise on the private or permission side as well. I don't want to discount by any means. They've done a lot, and really the way that we've just taken you through these specific slides has really been not necessarily the evolutionary process of how blockchain started, because blockchain was really initiated, let's say, by Bitcoin, which was a public network. But when we take a look at it, we're really saying to the enterprise organizations, well, we started with intranets with the internet prior to the internet, and now we have the internet. So we're kind of starting with the same type of concept with respect to blockchains, where we have private or permissioned consortium-based networks, which are kind of intranets. and public blockchains is to the internet today, where anybody has full read, write, permissions, and access. People speak about digital transformation. And what we're looking at here is the digital transformation of blockchain. That's probably a new concept. I know Gartner put out an article a few weeks back saying that about 90% of current implementations, enterprise implementations, will no longer have value per se into the future. But I tend to disagree, or we tend to disagree here at Envision Blockchain. We believe that digital transformation is a real thing. And that we continuously evolve and we can change things and enhance things and create more. And that's our job as a systems integrator in the space. So enter hybrid blockchains. We have network A here on the left, which is really showing this permissioned consortium network, whereby next to it on the right, we have a public network. Well, we always wanted to achieve that transparency and be able to prove out to the rest of the public or other users that transactions that are happening internally in the consortium or even a private blockchain are actually happening. Like what's going on inside, just because we can't write, read, potentially see the ledger. Is there any proof that we can have any sort of visibility? And the answer to that is yes. And you can see that we highlight constantly the blockchain in the middle. The red block, the red outline of the blockchain component in the middle is highlighted both in network A and in network B, because that's still the center of focus. We're not talking about the rest of the system. We're talking about moving information or posting information as a direct result of a specific business process from network A into a public network A. And that's exactly what we've tried to portray here. So we have this permission consortium that's interested in proving to the rest of the world that a transaction is posted to a public network, where theoretically that transaction can trigger or open a smart contract and trigger a series of transactions within the public network. So it's kind of the first form of interoperability, but we're not really there yet. But we kind of get the best of both worlds so far, meaning we have scalability, we have low latency or high throughput. There's still that low cost. We have confidentiality of data. We can still govern and manage, and we have optional public transactions. Now, optional public transactions, we didn't get into the cost and the price volatility with that, and that's a whole separate conversation. But really, the main point that we wanted to drive is that we're really evolving. We're really making the world available. We're trying to overcome these adoption challenges in trying to allow businesses or enterprise organizations, government entities to begin recognizing a return on investment quicker than they have in the past. And of course, that has to do with network participation. So enter the future of what things could actually look like. In theory, the possibilities are endless and there's no one direction of workflow. And we wanted to portray that literally every single possibility of transactions could theoretically happen to public or permissioned or private, which is realistically what you're seeing here, in order to move value cross-chain for various different use cases or industry verticals, so that we have this new layer that spans the world and all of its new intranet or public networks that can now communicate with each other and further the value of blockchain. And we call this concept interoperability. And it's right now in its infancy, and there's several projects that are public projects that are trying to tackle this concept and build upon it. And this concept of digital transformation is literally happening as we speak, and there's news constantly every day. And we really felt that it was important to really bring you and our audience in today to really begin discussing these concepts, so that we can begin having our audience and our clientele begin thinking about what this really does look like. How do we start moving forward into the future and not necessarily just thinking, one specific way right now and looking to further adopt. One critical area that I guess I failed to mention is, I would say, one of the biggest challenges in overcoming, blockchain adoption is we ourselves, the people, the business decision makers, the leaders of different government entities. We ourselves are put in a position to make these sort of decisions to evolve, and these sort of decisions require study, it requires research, it requires proof to executive leadership or individuals that manage to recognize that the steps that we're taking moving into the future are the correct steps, and that we're not just spending money aimlessly, and that we're trying to derive value out of brand new technology. And that's something that our organization is focused on. And of course, forward thinking is critical. Research is critical. Proving ROI is critical. And we wanted to make sure that these blockchain adoption concepts and forward thinking or thought is of course brought to you, our audience, our clients, and everybody that joins us on a monthly basis. So thank you very much for joining. We have, as mentioned, a series of workshops and different, Azure Marketplace offerings where you can come and you can visit, and of course, learn a little bit more from Blockchain 101, ideation, all the way through, POC development, pilot, production, go live, support models, and of course, get into, various different opportunities to work with us in various different capacities, from, researching different use cases and proving out value throughout various different networks.